The morning I realized someone was building a structure on my land, I didn't yell, I didn't call the police, I didn't even walk over right away. I just stood there with a cup of coffee in my hand, watching like I was looking at something that didn't quite belong in my world, like a scene from someone else's life that had accidentally wandered into mine. And the strangest part wasn't that they were building it. It was that they were acting like they had every right to. I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside of a mid-sized town in Oregon, the kind of place where people wave even if they don't know you, where the lawns are trimmed but not obsessively, where folks take pride in their homes but still leave their garage doors open on a Saturday afternoon. It's peaceful, predictable, maybe even a little boring if you're not the kind of person who appreciates routine. My property sits at the edge of the neighborhood, backed up against a thin stretch of woods that separates our subdivision from an older road. It's one of the reasons I bought it in the first place: a little extra space, a little more privacy, a feeling like the neighborhood ended just before things got too crowded. That morning, I noticed a pickup truck parked near the far end of my lot, right where the grass meets the dirt path that runs along the tree line. Two guys were unloading lumber, stacking it neatly like they'd done it 100 times before, and for a second I thought maybe they had the wrong address. Maybe they were supposed to be next door or across the street. Simple mistake, no big deal. But then more trucks showed up. A flatbed with cement bags, another with tools, a small crew, maybe 5 or 6 people total, all moving with purpose, not confusion. And that's when I started to feel that subtle shift in my chest, that quiet kind of unease that doesn't scream at you but settles in slowly, like a weight you didn't ask for. I walked out toward them, still holding my coffee, trying to keep things casual. "Hey, you guys sure you're in the right spot?" One of the workers, a guy in his 40s with a worn baseball cap and a beard that looked like it hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet, barely glanced at me. "Yeah, we're good," he said, like he'd answered that question 10 times already. I gave a small nod, but I didn't leave. "What exactly are you building?" He pointed vaguely behind him. "Warming hut. HOA project." That word, HOA, it always carries a certain tone, doesn't it? Not necessarily bad, not necessarily good, just authoritative in a way that feels a little too confident sometimes. I took a sip of my coffee, buying myself a second. "On this lot?" "Yep." He hammered a nail, as if that settled everything. "Community space." And that's when I looked down, not at him, but at the ground, because I knew exactly where my property line was. I had walked it myself when I first bought the place, back when I was still excited about every inch of land being mine. I knew where the survey markers were, those small metal pins half hidden in the dirt, easy to miss if you weren't looking, impossible to forget if you were. And they weren't on his side of where they were building. They were on mine. I could have said something right then, could have shut it down before the first board went up, could have called the HOA president, or even the city if I wanted to make a point. But something about the way he said it, community space, like it was already decided, like I was the one out of place, made me pause. "All right," I said quietly, more to myself than to him, and I turned back toward the house. From my kitchen window, I watched them work. Hours passed, and what started as a stack of lumber turned into a frame. Posts went into the ground. Concrete got poured. Measurements were taken with the kind of precision that comes from habit, not doubt. They weren't guessing. They weren't improvising. They had a plan. By the afternoon, I saw a familiar face walking up to the site, clipboard in hand, wearing that crisp, slightly too clean jacket that never quite fits the rest of the neighborhood. Darren Cole, the head of the HOA. Darren wasn't a bad guy, at least not in the obvious sense. He smiled a lot, shook hands firmly, always spoke like he was halfway through a presentation. But there was something about him that made conversations feel less like conversations and more like decisions being explained after they'd already been made. I stepped outside again, slower this time, more deliberate. "Darren," I called out. He turned, smiled immediately. "Hey, Mason, good to see you." I walked up, gesturing toward the structure. "You want to tell me what this is?" He glanced back at it, proud, almost glowing. "It's a warming hut. We've been discussing it for months, figured it'd be a great addition for the neighborhood, especially during winter, somewhere people can gather, warm up, build a stronger sense of community." "That's great," I said, nodding slightly. "But why is it on my land?" There was a pause, not long, just enough to register. Then he chuckled, like I'd made a light joke. "Well, technically this area is considered shared space," he said. waving his hand loosely. No, I replied, calm but firm. It's not. Another pause, this one a little tighter. Darren adjusted his jacket, glanced at the workers, then back at me. Look, the boundary lines in this section have always been a bit flexible. The HOA has maintained this area for years. Maintained it doesn't mean you own it. For a second, the smile slipped. Not completely, but enough to see what was underneath. We're doing something good here, Mason, he said, his tone shifting slightly, softer but with an edge. Something for everyone. I nodded again, slower this time. That doesn't give you the right to build on someone else's property. He held my gaze for a moment, then shrugged, like the conversation had already reached its conclusion in his mind. If there's an issue, we can sort it out later. Later. That word stuck with me as I walked back to the house, as the sound of hammers continued behind me, steady, confident, completely unbothered. Later meant they weren't going to stop. It meant they were betting on something. Maybe that I wouldn't push back. Maybe that it wouldn't matter once the structure was finished. Maybe that the idea of community would outweigh something as inconvenient as property lines. I stood at the window again, watching the frame rise higher, and that uneasy weight in my chest settled into something else, something quieter, more focused. Because the truth was, I didn't need to stop them. Not yet. If anything, the more they built, the more certain this situation became. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought started to form, slow, deliberate, almost patient. If they wanted to treat my land like it was theirs, then maybe I'd let them. Over the next few days, I did something that probably would have driven most people crazy. I stayed quiet. No emails, no angry phone calls, no legal threats, nothing. Just me, going about my routine like nothing unusual was happening. While just a few yards from my kitchen window, a full-blown construction project kept moving forward like it had been approved by God himself. And I'll be honest, it wasn't easy. Every instinct in me wanted to walk out there and shut it down, to point at the survey markers, to force them to acknowledge what was right in front of them. But there's a difference between reacting and choosing your moment. And something about the way Darren handled that conversation told me this wasn't going to be solved with a quick argument on a Tuesday afternoon. No, this needed time. So I watched. Day by day, the structure started to take shape. The frame turned into walls. The walls got wrapped and sealed. Windows went in with that satisfying click of finality, like each one was sealing their assumption into place. They added a proper door, even painted it a warm, inviting color, something between red and brown, the kind of shade that makes you think of fireplaces and winter evenings. It was almost impressive, if you ignored the fact that it didn't belong there. Neighbors started stopping by. At first it was just curiosity, people slowing down on their walks, glancing over, maybe asking a worker what was going on, but once word got out that it was an HOA project, something shifted. Oh, that's nice. I heard one woman say as she stood near the edge of my lawn, hands tucked into her sleeves. We've needed something like this. Another guy, Mark from 2 houses down, actually clapped one of the workers on the shoulder. About time we got some upgrades around here, he said, grinning like he'd personally approved the budget. I stood on my porch during one of those moments, just watching, listening. Nobody asked whose land it was, nobody questioned it, because in their minds, it had already been decided. The HOA said it was happening, so it must be legitimate. That's the thing about confidence. If you project it strongly enough, people stop asking questions. A couple days later, I ran into my neighbor, Elise. While she was walking her dog, she slowed down when she saw me, hesitated for a second like she wasn't sure if she should bring it up, then finally did. Hey, so, that hut thing, that's going to be really nice, don't you think? I smiled just a little. Yeah, it's something. She tilted her head, studying my face. You're okay with it, right? I mean, it's kind of on your side. There it was, finally, someone acknowledging it. Kind of, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. She gave a small, awkward laugh. I mean, close to your property. I let the silence sit for a second, just long enough to make the point without saying it directly. Elise, I said gently, it is on my property. Her smile faded, not completely, but enough to show uncertainty creeping in. Oh, I thought maybe the HOA had. They didn't. Another pause, longer this time. Her dog tugged slightly on the leash, sensing the shift in energy. Well, I'm sure they wouldn't just, she started, then stopped herself. Wouldn't what? I asked. She sighed, looking back toward the structure. Build something without making sure first. I nodded slowly. You'd think. She didn't have an answer for that, and honestly, neither did I, not in the way people usually expect answers to work. Because the truth wasn't complicated, it was just inconvenient. They didn't check because they didn't feel like they needed to. And the more I watched, the clearer that became. Darren showed up almost every day now, sometimes alone, sometimes with other HOA board members. They'd walk around the site, pointing at things, discussing details, occasionally making small adjustments. I overheard snippets of conversation drifting across the yard. Heater's gotta be strong enough for at least 10 people. We can put up a sign with ours, maybe some basic rules. This is exactly the kind of project that brings the neighborhood together. Together. That word again. It's funny how often people use it when they're making decisions for others. At one point, Darren caught me watching from the porch again and walked over, hands in his pockets, that same practiced smile back on his face. Coming along nicely, huh? He said. I shrugged. It's definitely coming along. He nodded, glancing back at the hut. People are excited. This is the kind of thing that really adds value, not just to the neighborhood, but to everyone's experience living here. Everyone's? I asked. He met my eyes, just for a second, then looked away. You know what I mean. I did, and I also knew he wasn't going to say it out loud. Because saying it out loud would mean acknowledging the part they were all trying to ignore. So what happens if someone doesn't want it there? I asked, keeping my tone light, almost curious. He smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. Mason, sometimes you have to look at the bigger picture. There it was, not an answer, just a justification. I nodded, like I understood, like I agreed, and in a way, I did understand, just not in the way he thought. Because the bigger picture he was talking about, it didn't include me. And that realization, more than anything else, is what made my decision solid. I wasn't going to fight them while they were building it. I was going to let them finish. Every nail, every window, every dollar they poured into that structure, it all mattered. Not just legally, but psychologically, because once something is complete, once people have invested time, money, and pride into it, that's when the reality hits the hardest. That's when losing it actually hurts. By the end of the second week, the hut looked finished. Not halfway, not almost there, finished. It had clean siding, solid steps leading up to the door, a small overhang to keep snow off the entrance. Inside, from what I could see through the windows, there were benches lining the walls and a compact heater installed in the corner. It was cozy, I'll give them that. If it had been built anywhere else, I probably would have used it myself. That's the part that almost made me laugh. One evening, just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting that soft orange light across the yard, I saw Darren and a couple of board members standing near the hut, talking excitedly. I stepped a little closer, not enough to interrupt, just enough to hear. Opening this weekend, one of them said. Yeah, we'll keep it simple, Darren replied. Hot cocoa, maybe some cider. Let people come by, check it out. Kids are gonna love it, another voice added. Darren nodded. This is what a real community looks like. I stood there for a moment, letting that sentence settle. Then I turned and walked back to the house without saying a word. That night, I sat at my kitchen table longer than usual, not doing much of anything. Just thinking about how easy it is for people to cross a line when they convince themselves it's for a good reason, about how quickly this would be nice turns into this is happening, and about how nobody had actually asked me a single, simple question. Not one. And that's what it came down to, in the end, not the structure, not the HOA, not even the legal side of things, just that one missing step. Asking. By the time I went to bed, my plan wasn't just an idea anymore. It was clear, settled, almost calm in a way I hadn't expected. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I just needed to wait a little longer. Let them celebrate. Let them believe it was theirs. And then, I'd remind them whose land they were standing on. The opening day felt more like a neighborhood festival than anything else. By late morning, people were already gathering around the hut, bundled up in jackets, kids running in small circles. Someone had set up a folding table with a big thermos of hot cocoa. And for a moment, just a brief moment, it almost looked exactly like what Darren had promised, warm, inviting, communal, the kind of thing you'd see in a brochure and think, yeah, that's a nice place to live. I stayed back at first, standing near the edge of my yard, hands in my pockets, just observing. Nobody really noticed me, and honestly, that fit the pattern. I hadn't been part of this from the beginning, not in their minds, not in the way they told the story to themselves. I caught bits and pieces of conversation drifting through the cold air. This is amazing. HOA really outdid themselves. My kids are going to be in here all winter. And every now and then, Darren's voice would cut through, smooth and confident, explaining how the idea came together, how it was for everyone, how it represented what the neighborhood stood for. He was in his element, shaking hands, nodding, smiling like a man who had just finished building something meaningful. At one point, he raised his voice slightly, just enough to gather attention. We wanted to create a space where anyone can come, warm up, connect with neighbors, no barriers, no complications, just a place that belongs to all of us. I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because of how complete the illusion had become. No barriers. That part stuck with me. I stayed for maybe 15 minutes, just long enough to see how fully everyone had embraced it, how natural it already felt to them. Then I turned and walked back inside without saying a word. I didn't need to rush, because the timing, that was everything. The crowd slowly thinned out as the afternoon turned into evening. The laughter faded, the last cups of cocoa were tossed away, and by nightfall, the hut sat quiet again, still, finished, proud, like it was waiting for the life it had just been promised. The next morning, the air was colder, sharper, the kind of cold that makes everything feel a little more real. I made my coffee like I always did, stood by the window for a second, looking out at the hut, and then I grabbed the padlock from the drawer. Nothing fancy, just a solid, simple lock, heavy enough to do the job, plain enough to say exactly what it needed to say without any extra words. I walked out there slowly, not sneaking, not hiding, just walking across my own yard like I had every right to be there, because I did. The door opened with a soft creak, and for the first time, I stepped inside. It was warm, not just physically, but in that intentional way, the benches neatly placed, the heater humming quietly in the corner, the space designed to feel welcoming, and for a second, I let myself take it in. They had done a good job. That was the truth. But good intentions don't redraw property lines. I stepped back outside, closed the door gently, and clicked the padlock into place. The sound was small, but it carried. A clean, final click. I stood there for a second, looking at it, then turned and walked back to the house like it was just another morning. It didn't take long. Within a couple of hours, I saw Darren's car pull up faster than usual, gravel crunching a little louder under the tires. He got out quickly, walked straight to the hut, and stopped when he saw the lock. Even from my porch, I could see the shift in his posture. Confusion first, then realization, then something tighter. He turned and headed straight toward me. "Mason," he called out, not yelling, but not casual either. "What is this?" I leaned back slightly in my chair. "It's a lock." "I can see that," he said, his jaw tightening. "Why is it on the door?" I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering. "Because it's my building." That landed exactly how I expected it to. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. The confidence from yesterday wasn't gone, but it wasn't as solid anymore. "Mason," he said, choosing his words carefully now. "This is a community structure." "No," I replied, just as calm. "It's a structure built on my land." He exhaled through his nose, glancing back at the hut like it might somehow confirm his version of reality. "We've already discussed this." "We did," I nodded. "And I told you it was my property." He stepped a little closer. "You can't just lock people out of something that was built for the neighborhood." I set my cup down on the table beside me. "Actually, I can." There was a long pause after that, the kind that stretches just enough to make everything feel heavier. "You're being unreasonable," he said finally, a hint of frustration breaking through. "Am I?" I asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, I'm the only one who didn't make a decision about someone else's property without asking." That hit harder than anything else I'd said so far. Not loud, not aggressive, just accurate. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone, probably already thinking about next steps, who to call, how to frame this. But the problem was, no matter how he framed it, the facts weren't on his side. And deep down, I think he knew that. By the afternoon, a couple of other HOA members showed up, then a few neighbors, drawn in by curiosity more than anything else. The same people who had been praising the project yesterday were now standing at a distance, whispering, trying to piece together what had changed overnight. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue, didn't escalate. I just repeated the same thing, calmly, every time someone asked. It's on my property. That was it. No speeches, no threats, just the truth, over and over again. And eventually, that truth forced its way through all the assumptions, all the confidence, all the "this is for everyone" language that had been floating around for weeks. A couple days later, Darren came back, different this time. No jacket, no clipboard, no presentation voice. Just him, standing at the edge of my yard like someone who finally understood the situation he was in. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded toward the porch. "Sure." We sat down, and for a second, neither of us said anything, the hut visible just over his shoulder, quiet again, locked, waiting. "We should have handled this differently," he said finally. I didn't interrupt. "We assumed, and that was a mistake." There it was. Not an excuse, not a justification, just a statement. "And now?" I asked. He looked back at the hut, then at me. "Now we figure out what to do next, together." Together. That word again. But this time, it sounded different. Less like a decision, more like a request. And that's where I'm going to leave this, because what happened after that, whether I let them lease the land, whether they had to move the structure, whether we found some middle ground or not, that's a whole other conversation. What matters is this moment right here, the one where everything shifted, not because of an argument, not because of a fight, but because reality finally caught up with assumption. All of this, every dollar they spent, every hour they worked, every bit of pride they poured into that project, it all came down to one thing they skipped. They didn't ask. And sometimes, that's the most expensive mistake you can make. Now I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have stopped them on day one? Or would you have let it play out the way I did? And if you were on the HOA side, do you think good intentions make this okay? Or is crossing that line always wrong, no matter the reason? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd probably expect. And if this story got you thinking even a little differently about boundaries, ownership, or how communities actually work, go ahead and like the video. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, and I'll see you in the next one.